2025 was a year that shook the House of Windsor scandals, shocking revelations, and public heartbreak that left the monarchy on the ropes. Let's unpack how we got here, what it means, and what the royal family must do next. It's been a brutal 12 months. From fresh allegations linked to Jeffrey Epstein to a shrinking inner circle and high-stakes state visits, the royal story has been a non-stop roller coaster. I'm Matt Wilkinson, royal editor. And today I'm joined in spirit by veteran voices who've seen this all before. Elsa Anderson, former press secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, and Simon Vieger, royal correspondent for 5 News. Together, we'll look back at the highs, the lows, what the future might hold for the monarchy. If you want 3 words to sum up 2025, Elsa chose devastating, sad, and hopeful. Devastating, because the revelations about Prince Andrew and Epstein have been disgraceful and corrosive. Sad, for the personal losses that hit the family. Hopeful, because of the king's message about his reduced cancer treatment, a small, bright spot in an otherwise bruising year. So where does 2025 sit in the history of royal crises? Simon points out that Britain has weathered major shocks before an abdication. The death of Princess Diana, the turmoil of 1992, but many of us feel this has to be up there near the top. The Andrew story has lingered for 15 years then, exploded into a drip of damaging emails and 2 major books this year that revealed more about who knew what and when. Those developments exposed inconsistencies, lies, and a pattern of terrible judgment that's hard for the public to forgive. What pushed things over the edge? For many, it was the release of emails that showed Andrew kept in contact with Epstein long after he said he'd cut ties. The tone of those messages, casual, apologetic, even flippant, made it look like he minimized the seriousness of teammates. The situation, too many viewers, his demeanor during the Newsnight interview was the final straw, a blaze. Evasive performance that felt wildly out of step with the gravity of the allegations. The king and other senior royals have had to act swiftly and some would say ruthlessly, stripping titles and honors to contain the damage. But even those measures can feel reactive rather than restorative. Has it ended for Andrew? Not necessarily. There's a feeling that this could continue to rumble into 2026. More photographs and testimonies may emerge, and questions remain about whether all relevant inquiries have been exhausted. Legally, Andrew has never been charged, and the FBI has not interviewed him yet. The reputational harm is enormous. Moving him from Royal Lodge to a quieter life at Sandringham might reduce his visibility, but it won't erase the headlines. Meanwhile, the fallout has forced the monarchy into defensive posture after a year where negative stories dominated the news cycle. The overarching question now is whether the king can rebuild public trust. Control can only go so far if the perception remains that bad judgment and secrecy sit closely to the crown. Another long-running flashpoint is Harry's security row. Since stepping back in 2020, Harry and Meghan have argued they need protection when they visit the UK because credible threats against them persist. Harry points to racist death threats and the violent atmosphere around public appearances as justification. The counter-argument from many in Britain is economic and moral. Why should taxpayers fund armed security for someone who chose to live abroad, now residing in a multi-million-dollar home in California? This has become a thorny, bureaucratic tangle. Appeals, legal reviews, and public debate over who pays and when. Some argue Harry gave up entitlement to full royal protection when he stepped down. Others insist the risk to his life and his children remains unchanged. The Home Office's review process by the so-called RAV Committee is complex and controversial. There's also the tricky issue of whether private security can be used. The short answer is yes, but not with firearms. The upshot is this. If Harry wins his legal arguments, we may see more visits from his family and a thaw in relations. If he loses, the rift could become permanent, leaving grandparents and grandchildren still separated. And then there's Meghan, a cultural lightning rod who has spent 2025 pivoting into entrepreneurship. From a Netflix project to a branded food range, She's embraced business ventures in ways that have been both celebrated and derided. Some people are hate-watching her content. Others are curious. The question for Meghan now is sustainability. Can she build lasting, mainstream success beyond the novelty factor of being the Duchess of Sussex? She's clearly trying. The brand is heavily labeled Duchess of Sussex, which raises the question of whether her commercial efforts would fare differently under her birth name, Meghan Markle. Either way, she's working to secure financial independence. A practical move if you consider the family decided to give up royal dower funding when they relocated. Looking at the royal family as a whole, there are deeper structural questions. Public is increasingly impatient with the idea that privilege comes without accountability. If the monarchy expects taxpayers to support full-time royals, there's an implicit contract, public service in exchange for public funds. If members pursue private commercial ventures, the optics change, and so does public tolerance. The lesson might be that a clearer, more modern framework is needed, one that defines what counts as a working royal, outlines acceptable private activities, and makes lines of accountability explicit. So what can the king do to steady the ship in 2026? First, visible transparency where possible, not performative gestures, but clear, consistent messages about values and responsibilities. Second, decisive but fair action when misconduct is shown. Third, a renewed focus on the core work the monarchy does well: public service, charitable engagement, and national unity. Repairing trust won't be quick, but rebuilding credibility requires a plan that looks beyond quick fixes. If there's a silver lining from 2025, it's that the issues are out in the open. That painful exposure gives the institution a chance to adapt or risk permanent erosion of support for a family that has survived abdications, tragedies, and public scandals. Survival is possible, but only if lessons are learned and changes are made as we head into 2026. The big question remains: will the firm evolve or double down on tradition and hope that time heals all wounds? Only time will tell, but the public is watching more closely than ever.